We are just 1, 2, 3 days away. I can count.
Yeah.
3 days away from the MARC Championships and men's rowing and women's rowing, heading back to Cherry Hill for the second time this season for the conference championship. And I am joined by the head coach of men's rowing for the second time as well. After deleting our first chat, Chuck Stollenwerk. Coach,
Hey, yeah, thanks
for coming back.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You got to fix things where you got to fix them, right?
Hey, thanks for rolling with the punches. I appreciate
course.
it. I really do. Let's chat about Cherry Hill.
Okay.
Going back after going to the Knecht Cup.
Yeah.
Excellent weekend for the Raiders
Oh, it
the
was
first
great.
time around.
Yeah, it was great.
I mean, really, just a tremendous weekend. You got the women's boats winning races. You guys, I think the lowest we finished for any Raider boat was 4th.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Really a tremendous weekend. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, it was especially great coming off of last year where we had so many problems. It was just a lot of sick people. We were, jockeying with the lineups quite a bit. And I mean, there's a little bit of that goes with every year, but everything sort of came together for that race, especially for our final. The guys, it's a new lineup for them. We've got first-year guys in there, never rowed before, and that some people just pick it up quick, and that's what, especially our guy Drew, who is sitting in 4 seat right now, has been able to pick up pretty quick, and that's great. Like, we love people like that because then you get them for 4 years. So that's awesome. But the whole group is an excellent group of guys. I was watching them this morning, and they just got so much pop to them, and it was really just going to be a matter of when. Was this boat going to just gel and take off and have their own identity, right? And I felt like they really tapped into that in that finals race because they jumped up a spot time-wise from the heats. And what I had told them was, guys, you need to find another gear. And that's nothing different than I usually tell them. But sometimes they can really do that, and other times they can't always put all those things together to make it work.
Sure.
But this time they did. They found another gear and then some and did a great job. So I was very pleased about that.
For sure. Drew is a name that you mentioned, comes out of nowhere. I feel like we're through half the races this semester, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this guy's in the boat now.
Yeah.
All of a sudden we're kind of taking names. Oh, look at this. That's pretty remarkable when you have someone just kind of grab it like that.
They get it,
You got to love that as a coach. Talk to me a little bit about how, I mean, I'm assuming it's the same course that you're going to race from the Knecht Cup now for the MARC Championship.
Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about that and how lucky it is, I'm sure, for you guys to be going back to a course where you've had some success at.
Yeah.
But it's also got to be a little bit of a downgrade because you're not going somewhere different.
That's true. That's a very popular venue, not just for us, but for the entire East Coast racing in that area. There's a couple of places like that. And so you'll find them on the Schuylkill River. You'll find them at Cherry Hill. You find it at Mercer, where we've been a few times. And so it's nice to go back to those courses. And I like the Knecht Cup / MARC Championships course because it's a pretty even bet across the board. Sometimes you get different conditions based on the flow of a river if it's on, if they've got the dam gates open, or if the wind comes from one place or another, you get a head or a tailwind. Sometimes it favors certain lanes. I don't feel like that's as much of an issue overall at the Cherry Hill course. And I started going to that course in 1993, and I've always felt like it's been a pretty good venue. And you get to see a whole lot of the races for the spectators. That's great. They come with the big Jumbotron, so I can sit at the finish line and catch the actual finish, and then you can also see most of the race from the Jumbotron. So that's really nice. I like that course. The people out there really like us, and that's not always been the case. Sometimes you have to really beg, borrow, cheat, and steal just to get someone to say Milwaukee School of Engineering rather than Minnesota School of Engineering or something like that. Or the commentators didn't do their due diligence and find out about not just us, but other teams as well.
Sure.
But the Knecht Cup people, so welcoming, great folks. The woman running it came up and talked to me personally and was very welcoming and even brought a television crew over to talk to me. And I'll see if I can find that still and send it over to you. I've been having a little trouble with that.
Okay.
But so it's a great course. And it's not exactly the same people running it, but we're familiar with the MARC people, and it's going to be the MARC Championships. And we've been able to run these championships pretty successfully, and I can't imagine that it'll be that different this year. So we're very excited to go back.
For sure, and it's a loaded week for Raiders across the board. We have conference competitions in men's lacrosse, women's tennis, women's tennis, men's rowing, women's rowing, men's track and field, women's track and field. Everyone seems to be just getting ready, gearing up. Talk to me about what these past couple weeks have been like for you guys between the Knecht Cup and now. What's it been like in terms of gearing up for this race? Are you guys ramping up? Was it a little bit of a downgrade and then ramping up? What has it been like managing that workload?
It's been really interesting because we had all that flooding that come in, and so we actually had to change venues. So we packed up our boats and we moved out to Little Lake Muskegon. So what we ended up having to do is talk to Parks and Rec out there and make sure we're all good with that. And we had to be good neighbors and not be too loud, and just make sure that we had everything in order for a second venue so that we could go out and continue rowing. And basically all that really changed for me was I sort of switched gears from going to a direct competition mode between boats as far as solidifying lineups and just making sure the guys get out and get a bunch of meters in, which is okay. It's an okay sort of second agenda to have. But I was not that familiar with that body of water that I felt comfortable doing that. Sure. So what that means is you're putting boats head to head, then you're switching guys back and forth and getting the metrics of the time pieces that they do so that you can maybe get a little bit more empirical data to, okay, this lineup is faster than this one. And I figured it out pretty much already, but you always want to check and be fair to everybody, make sure everyone gets a shot who's close or who you think could contribute or maybe even make faster at some point, even if it's now, not now, it could be in the near future. So we had to deal with that. And then once we got back, it was almost perfect timing because the flow rate of the river had gone down just enough the day we got back, and then we had to do a bunch of equipment rigging and re-rigging to make sure we were ready to go on the water. And it had been pretty good towards the end of last week, the beginning of this week. As far as just solidifying the lineups, I feel very confident in how everything's going. I was able to do everything I needed to do, except for this morning going out, we had some really bad debris in the water. And so we damaged one of the boats, and I already fixed it, so it's not permanent damage. But it still gets in the way, and it makes it so you don't get a full practice in all the time. But
sure,
it's like challenges you get every year. It's just a matter of when is it going to happen. But in answering your second part of your question, I feel like we plateaued out a little bit in the middle of that whole mess of going back and forth and organized chaos, whatever you want to call it. I don't throw that word around lightly, but I felt like we had sort of plateaued out a little bit. Like the guys look tired, and they're feeling the entire weight of the season coming up now, and then they're getting so close to the end and the end of school as well. So
Just gonna say.
I kind of felt it a little bit, but now, especially today, in watching both the V1 and the V2 go out, they had a lot more pop and a lot more vigor and energy to them. I think once they established their finalized lineups and we make sure their equipment's all tip top and ready to go, they were popping pretty good this morning. So I'm very excited to see what they're going to do this weekend. And they seem excited too.
Love to hear that. And kudos to you guys, because it's one thing for the athletes when you're in a new environment. You kind of always expect that as an athlete. That's part of the game. But as a coach, when you have to evaluate before a big race like that, and you're not even familiar with the environment, that's a pretty big uncontrolled XYZ variable to throw into the mix. And, credit to you for rolling with the punches there. Talk to me a little bit about why you use a cone instead of the big shiny megaphones. I had to reach out to one of your guys, David Frankel. He outsourced a few questions for me. I'm going to throw that one your way.
Yeah, oh no, that's great. That's a funny story.
Shout out to David.
Yeah, great job, David. Thank you. I'm sure he's seen his share of why I use that cone. I used to use the megaphones, the electronic ones. In hearing that as an athlete myself, I couldn't always understand what the coach was saying. And maybe that was just a me problem.
No, I agree.
But it filters. It just sounded
oddly.
a lot like just noise, right? And
the parents on the peanuts.
Okay, coach. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it was a lot of nodding. Okay, coach. And then I would go clarify later. And so I was looking to sort of minimize that if I could. I still want them to be able to hear me, and I got a pretty big voice that I'm able to do that. We're in relatively confined spaces for the most part, so a lot of it bounces off the the walls of the river, which is a bit to the chagrin of some of our neighbors on the water. They don't always like the noise.
Welcome to city living.
I know, right? Yeah.
I live in an apartment, and every time I want to complain, I'm like, I live in the city.
Right. It's like moving next to a train station, right?
Tell the ambulance to turn its sirens off. Like,
all right.
Who am I?
Be quiet.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, so there's that, and I think they understand it pretty well. I even asked them after our first interview. I said, hey, you guys can understand me okay, right? And I try to also think ahead on that a little bit when I speak to them so that they're not focused on fixing what they're doing in rowing. And I'm not talking over the coxswains either, right?
Sure.
Because they need to administer instruction to the students. And so I will wait until they're done with their piece and turning around when I can get a little bit more of their attention. If it's something I think that I'm just reminding them and I'm going to say, hey, watch out that you're doing this, they'll give me a nod and say, okay, and then they'll work on fixing it. If it requires more elaboration, I'll wait and speak to them when they can hear me and we can have a back and forth about it.
Sure.
But then there's also the other issue where I had these megaphones and they're kind of expensive. They're, at the very least, they're like $100, right?
Sure.
Well, if you come to an abrupt stop with the coaching launch, sometimes they'll flip over and break or flip over and go in the water and they'll sink. Or sometimes coach will get upset and take it and work it against the console. And I always felt bad about it after the fact, regardless of what it was. And so I would go buy a new one. Well, there was one point where I looked up and I saw all of the electronic megaphones were ones that I had purchased after breaking the one that I had in the launch. And I said, I'm not doing that anymore. So I fashioned the cone that has been made famous. It's a orange parking cone with the larger ones that had the base cut off and a handle put onto it. So everybody knows that's mine. And I can beat that thing to its heart content and nothing happens to it. And if it falls in the water, it floats relatively well. I've had to go after it and get it and turn around. It still floats. And
water doesn't damage it.
Yeah, not at all.
Innovation at its finest, right?
That's
there.
Great. Sometimes you got to take a step back to take a step forward.
Exactly. I don't want to offend, but you're long in the tooth when it comes to rowing. You've been around the sport for a long time. You yourself rowed as a college athlete. Talk to me a little bit about the difference in the sport back then and what it's like now. Maybe just the difference between the team camaraderie level, what that's like, and just the sport at large, what it's, how it's transformed over the years.
Yeah, there's been a lot of things. I mean, somebody asked me about it yesterday. I think it's our new guy, Charlie, that we got.
From men's hockey, Charlie.
Exactly. Yeah, he's doing great as well. He's one of those guys, he's picking it up quick, so that's great. It's great to see that. He asked me about the equipment because his father rowed as well. So I would imagine he's somewhere around my age. And he rowed up in St. Catharines in Canada. And he asked me about the difference in the equipment. And I said, well, it's relatively the same from when my ending time was as a senior. They started fashioning these boats that were made out of completely carbon fiber and only weighed somewhere around the neighborhood of 200 pounds, right? And so they have streamlined that a bit more to make the boats faster in other ways, but the weight was a big thing. So before that, you had composite boats with wood and fiberglass and also completely wooden boats that were upwards close to 300 pounds, right? So that's a big drop in the weight.
Sure.
There was that, and then there was also the oars themselves were different. When I rowed most of the years, we had Macon blades, and those look more like a canoe paddle. They're symmetrical, so you could row either side and put them in and they would work. They're a very ubiquitous type of oars. Now they've got something that looks a little bit more like a hatchet or almost like the bottom edge of a teardrop. And so they've localized more of the oar itself with a wider face on it and more of it stays in the water. So it's a different configuration too. Personally, I think that if you had to learn with the Macon blades, you really had to learn sort of an extra step to be a good rower. Mm-hmm. It was just different. And so I've rowed with both, and they kind of, I don't want to say they dumbed them down, but they made it a lot easier for a person to place the blade in the water and put it to the right depth with the newer style blades than with the older ones. The older ones, if you didn't do it right, it got a little loose in there and you couldn't necessarily maximize your output as easy. So that's what I'll say about that. Culture-wise, I think the difference in rowing culture-wise, it's not a huge difference, but I think it's got more to do with more so how maybe society has changed. Sure. Things that were considered rites of passage when I was an oarsman, and the generations before me is now a lot of that's considered hazing, and so.
Sure.
There's a wide spectrum on that. Some of that I think is good for people, not the hazing, but just the rite of passage stuff within reason. It's these people that are torturing these poor students that you don't want that. You don't need to, dehumanize people, and you don't need to take it to that extreme of a level. But I think that going through some adversity as a group can bring people together. And I think that a very slight dose of that in the proper administration of it is okay, but not to the degree that hazing had become, and that's what happens is society and every all sorts of cultural stuff. It rights the ship. When someone takes it too far, then it gets brought back, and so you hope that somewhere in the middle, you get something that remains productive. So
yeah, and it's tough because I look back fondly and think of like the Hard Knocks NFL series, and when they get guys and they saran wrap them to the goalpost and then they dump the ice water on them. And, I'm like, man, it's a shame we can't do that anymore. But there is a very fine line. And then once you cross that, and then, but like you said, it did also get out of hand, specifically at the college level.
Yeah.
And that's something you want to avoid at all costs.
Yeah, exactly.
If you and Coach Hurd had to swap teams and Coach Hurd got the rowers and you got the basketball players, who do you think would have, I don't want to say an easier job, who do you think would probably have success earlier on, maybe, is the better way to put it?
That's a really good question.
Can your guys dribble?
Well, I'll say this. Before I watched them play basketball, I might have said different because they're such good athletes. And watching them play basketball, they were as aggressive and as quick up and down the court. And so I regard that very high. And I think, well, maybe with a little practice, maybe he could make them into great basketball players.
True, yeah.
But then I watched their ball handling and their shooting, and it was so awful. And I think that the art of, doing your offensive and defensive schemes and your ball handling skills and your ability to make a great shot from multiple different places. I have a ton of respect for those basketball players. I always have, but even more so now. Not saying that our guys are bad at that, but just watching guys who are so entrenched in a different sport try and play a sport like that and be successful at it.
I'll give them this. They'd be low-scoring games, I would think.
Yeah, for sure it would. A lot of physicality, a lot of low scoring.
A lot of defense.
Yep. I'm sure Coach Hurd is a great coach. I'm sure he could do a great job with them. Our sport is sort of geared towards bringing people up who have no experience. And if you have a good athletic base and you have some tall guys, you can go really far with it pretty quick. So I think we're talking also about the amount of time it takes. If I have somebody for a full year and they have possessed certain athletic skills, a certain body type, I can make them very successful pretty quick.
Sure.
So it would be interesting to see. I don't know that we could experiment with that, but it would be fun to try. I mean, just thinking about it, it's like wishing you had like $8 million.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to burn the eligibility both ways.
Right.
Probably no good for either program.
But it's that's one thing I do look for when I look to recruit on campus is somebody who has done some kind of a similar sport before, right?
Sure.
So if they've been a triathlete or had some kind of success in another sport where you're doing repetitive type pieces like in swimming, but if you got injured or something and you're not able to perform as a swimmer or as a lacrosse player anymore, being that rowing is such a low impact sport and it's a very linear motion, the injuries that you do get typically you see are from just way overuse, right? And
that's what I was about
and if you are a good planner as to how much you're having your athletes develop, you don't necessarily have to overdo the meters, right? If you do long periods during certain parts of the year or certain parts of the week, you can avoid that, as well as if you have a good strength and conditioning program and you're paying attention to them and they are also paying attention to themselves. So, and teaching the proper technique as well. So it all factors in to paying attention, right? And so that's,
of course.
That's it's an interesting idea. I would love to have to try that out with some other sports if any of the other coaches would be game for it if it was in their off season or something.
For sure, yeah. And you said rowing's a low impact sport. If you ever had it where rowing became a collision sport, I'm sure you'd probably have some questions as to
right?
what the deal is here. Rowing demolition derby. I can't imagine that.
Yeah, jousting.
Maybe entertaining.
Right.
Yeah, but I can't imagine very organized.
It's bad. Usually you got nothing for months and months and whatever, and then all of a sudden if there is an accident, it's usually really bad because if those two boats come together and
sure.
It's a lot of mass.
Yeah, no, I would not want to be on either side of that.
Me neither. No, and I try not to be.
Another David Franco. Why is Andre always late?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't remember what I answered the last time, and you wouldn't think because he's a military guy, right? They're usually pretty prompt. I think,
that's that was the eyebrow raiser when he gave me that one. I was like,
yeah, or was it what can we do to get him there on time? And I said, I don't know, maybe have somebody drive in front of his place with a fishing rod and a carrot sticking on the end or a Twinkie, whatever he likes to eat, and then
right.
Blow some in the window with a fan or something and get him to wake up and whatever it takes. Loudspeakers and an extra buddy. We try to pair everybody up with a buddy so that everybody knows who's coming. We rarely have problems with attendance, but yeah, some of the. Not many, but one or two of the guys sometimes cut it a little close sometimes. So
sure.
If they do it too much, I will talk to them, and they don't want to have to talk to me about that just because we just don't do that. But I feel like it's gotten much better. So since the last time, but I'm sure with Andre we'd have to be creative. He's a super nice guy, and he does very well with his rowing and his erg scores and everything. So I don't want to say we cut him slack, but we think of more creative ways that maybe aren't punish-like to get him down there, right? So we still want him, but we just want him to, maybe up his game just a little bit, right?
Sure.
But Andre's great. He's been a great rower for us. We really appreciate everything he brings to the table.
That reminds me of my first college roommate I had. We'd have 6 a.m. lifting, and I was more of an early riser because I needed to mentally prepare and get ready to lift because it wasn't my favorite thing in the world. So I had to, kind of doom and gloom for 10 minutes.
Give yourself a little pep talk.
Get up, walk around, get the blood flowing before we, get ready to get yelled at by a guy who's 5'3". No offense, Coach Renardi. But he was always a guy who would, 5 minutes is all I need. I'm rolling out of bed and onto the bus and we're good to go. And so we had developed what I had thought was a system. Mm-hmm. Turned out one day, it was not a system. Mm-hmm. It was he was getting lucky the entire time, and I just happened to close the door loud enough to jostle him awake mostly.
That's funny.
But I remember then he was late by about 20 minutes to a lift, and you were gonna have some sort of punishment for that. Yeah. Maybe a bunch of squats, maybe pushing a sled, something. But I remember him coming up to me like, why didn't you wake me up? I would be like, I didn't know that was my job.
Sorry, guy, I didn't know.
It's funny how some guys, you just got to get that little extra something to get them up in the morning. And I think as I get older, I'm understanding that a little bit more.
You deviated from the program is what happened. Even though it's unspoken, you still deviated from it. Yeah, it is interesting. We do have some policy in place where if somebody's late, they got to go run the hill behind the boathouse.
Sure.
And that's no kind of fun running up that hill, but it's good for them too. It's running hills like that is like running stairs. So it's something that's good for them, but you got to suffer for the cure sometimes. So.
Yeah. Now that you say that, ours was called the Versa Climber, which was like a stair machine, but it also had arms, like climbing a ladder.
I've seen people on those. Yeah.
And I forget what the marker you had to hit was, but you had to show up at 5 a.m. before the 6 a.m. workout to do your climbing.
Yeah, and it was probably no picnic kind of a workout either.
I made it to every 6 a.m. lift on time.
Of course.
Because I knew that hour of climbing, pass. We'll get away from the bad stuff. We'll get to the good stuff. What's the funniest moment you've had in recent memory with the guys?
Oh, goodness. That's a good question.
Or one that comes to mind.
It's so hard. Those conversations aren't always great to repeat. I probably lose something. I'll say I lose something in the translation. What's a funny thing? Boy, that's a good question. It's just sort of in general when the guys sort of get on one another. If somebody's not paying attention or something, they'll needle them a little bit. I wish I really had.
And that's where you really find out.
Yeah,
the good information.
Yeah, I think one of the funnier things was this morning, and this was very funny to me. I knew sort of what was going on, but of course I had to push the buttons on the guys, right? So we were heading through the bridge down by Humboldt, and one of the guys just started. It was Garen Schilling, right? And Garen's been great for us too. Another multi-sport guy, right? And he starts shouting out muskrat, right? And he might have pointed or something. I didn't see him point, but after he said it the second time, and I thought to myself, I can't let this go. And so I said, what happened, Garen? I said, the guys, is that the new nickname the guys gave to you? And they all thought that was hilarious, right? And me seeing the reaction of that, and then you hear somebody say, maybe that ought to be your nickname, right?
So, sliding doors moment.
Yeah, right. So yeah, we have a lot of fun that way. And that was just how it was. Those moments of multiple points of interpretation, we like to have a good time down there. I like the guys to want to come down there, and that's part of that. I think it's working very hard, and sometimes it's a bit of a grind, and it's kind of monotonous. So you take the laughs when you can get them too, right? It never gets out of control, but it's fun to have that every once in a while.
Yeah, and sometimes you need them.
Yeah,
sometimes you really need them.
Yeah.
All right, Coach. Before I let you go here, finish this sentence for me. We will have success at the MARC Championships if.
I would say if the planets come into alignment. However, I think they're pretty close to being into alignment right now. I think we're close. When we had our first race against Marietta in Wisconsin and Mercyhurst, I thought we had a decent race. We were far behind those guys, but we were also at a bit of a disadvantage for a variety of reasons. New lineups, not the equipment we use for our races typically. It was the work boats, but we did not use that as a crutch. We went after it, and I thought that they did a good job. But since then, I've seen so much more improvement. So I think that with the workouts, with the giving these guys everything that they need now to be successful as far as the equipment goes, as far as the training goes, as far as them being together enough to be comfortable in their own skin, I think those are the planets that are coming into alignment. I think they're real close. So the only thing that I think could stand in our way is if we just hit some kind of a mental wall, but those guys are pretty tough. I think that as a group, those guys, their minds are pretty steel trap-like. So I'm excited to see what these guys can pull off, and I know that in the process, they're the kind that would die trying, and I think that that includes both boats. Those guys are locked in, and that's great to see at this time of year and this close to the race. So. Yeah, planets got to come into alignment, man. Yeah.
Obviously, we're all rooting for you and rooting for every team at MSOE as they compete in their conference championships throughout this week. But you can catch men's rowing out on the East Coast, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, the MARC Championships this Saturday, May 2nd. Can you believe it's already May?
Yeah,
look at
hard
that.
to believe.
Thank you, Coach, for taking the time to join me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you, Greg, for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Coach.
Go all Raiders teams. I want to come back and find out that everyone else did as well as we did. So.
That's the plan.
That's the plan.
Awesome. Sweet. And